Call me old school, but I played the very first Sims game way back when it came out in 2000. Back then, the graphics were pixelated, the characters were blocky, and the gameplay was deceptively simple. But there was something about it, something that felt a little too real, a little too close to the uncanny valley. I remember one particular night when I decided to dive back into the game after years of not touching it. I booted up an old laptop, blew off the dust from the original CD, and installed it. There was no internet connectivity back then for this game, no updates or expansions. It was just me, the eerie hum of the computer fan, and the world of SimCity. I created a new family, just a single Sim named Daniel, a lonely writer living in a small, dark apartment. I gave him the traits of being creative and solitary, mirroring my own life at the time. As I played, something felt off. The more I watched Daniel write his novels, the more the screen seemed to flicker, as if the game was struggling to keep up with reality. Days turned into weeks in the game, and Daniel's apartment began to change subtly. Shadows grew darker in corners where there were none before, and the furniture seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. I started to notice messages on the screen, not from the game's usual pop-ups, but from Daniel himself. "I know you're watching," one message read while he was supposedly asleep. Another time, when I had him interact with his computer, the screen within the game flashed, "You can't escape this." The eeriness escalated when Daniel's behaviors became more autonomous. He'd stare directly at the camera, or what felt like directly at me, with those pixelated eyes that seemed to burrow into my soul. One night, after a long session, I tried to exit the game, but the cursor wouldn't move to the X button. Instead, it hovered over Daniel, who stood up from his desk, walked to the front door, and opened it. Outside his apartment was no longer the familiar street of SimCity, but a dark, endless void. He stepped out, and as he did, the screen went black. The laptop's fan whirred louder, almost like a scream, and then everything went silent. The game wouldn't close though. No matter what I did, the screen remained black with just one line of text in the middle, "Come join me." I shut down the laptop forcibly, but the next day when I turned it on, the game was already running. Daniel was back in his apartment, but now he wasn't alone. There was another Sim, one I hadn't created, standing right next to him, staring directly at me through the screen. It was me, or at least my avatar in this twisted version of the game. Every night since, I felt like I've been watched, not just in the game but in my own life. The line between what's digital and what's real has blurred. I've stopped playing, but sometimes I swear I hear the sound of the Sims' music. It's a haunting, repetitive melody, and it seems to be echoing from somewhere in my home. And I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, in some dark digital dimension, Daniel is still out there, writing, waiting, and watching. I have vivid memories of playing one of the Sims games with my cousin Andrea as a kid. I think it was The Sims 2. We would spend hours creating families, building houses, and watching the lives of our pixelated creations unfold. But there was one session that neither of us has ever been able to forget. It was a summer afternoon, and we decided to make a new family. We named them the Haraways, and their house was a modest little place in the suburbs. We made them a bit eccentric, with odd jobs and peculiar hobbies. The game started normally enough, with the usual cheerful music and bright graphics, but as the day in game turned to night, the atmosphere shifted. We noticed it first with Mr. Haraway, an artist who liked to paint. His paintings started to change. Instead of landscapes or still lifes, he began painting dark, disturbing scenes. Figures lurking in shadows, eyes peering from walls, and hands reaching out from beneath beds. Andrea and I laughed it off at first, thinking it was just some new feature or a glitch. But then things got weirder. Mrs. Haraway, who was usually cheerful, began to look scared all the time. Her mood would plummet whenever she was in the same room as Mr. Haraway's latest paintings. We tried to make her interact with other Sims, but she'd only glance nervously at the paintings, her virtual face frozen in terror. The creepiest part came when we decided to have a little fun, making the Haraways throw a party in the evening. As guests arrived, the house felt alive with activity, but that soon turned sour. One by one, the guests would disappear if they got too close to Mr. Haraway's art studio. They just vanished. No sound, no error message, just gone. We checked the family tree, and those Sims were completely erased from existence. Andrea and I were spooked, but also intrigued. We decided to delete the paintings, but they wouldn't disappear. Instead, they seemed to multiply, appearing in unexpected places around the house. The game's music had turned into a low, ominous hum, and the pixelated world seemed to darken, the shadows growing longer and more pronounced. In one chilling moment, we decided to check the game files, looking for any signs of a mod or hack, but there was nothing unusual. It was then, as we peered back at the screen, that we saw something we couldn't explain. In one of the paintings, there was a figure that looked exactly like Andrea, her pixelated avatar in the game. However, she was trapped in the painting, her face contorted in fear. We shut down the game in panic, but the next day when Andrea came over, we decided to check if it was just a one-off glitch. The game loaded, but now, the Haraway house was dark, abandoned, with the paintings still there, more numerous, and eerily, one of them now included my digital likeness. We never played that save again, and we uninstalled the game, but the memory lingers, especially on nights when the shadows in my room seem a bit too deep, or also when I hear what sounds like the faint, haunting melody of The Sims. I sometimes wonder if those paintings are still out there, in some digital limbo, waiting for new players to stumble upon them. I never got too much into The Sims, but I did buy my little brother one of the expansion packs for Christmas one year. It was called Mysterious Encounters, and it promised new adventures and supernatural elements. My brother, Tim, was over the moon, eager to dive into this new world of possibilities. He installed it right away on our family PC, which sat in the basement where the lighting was always a bit too dim and the air always carried a slight chill. Tim started a new neighborhood, creating a family with an interest in the occult, thinking it would be fun to explore the new features. At first, everything was normal. The Sims went about their daily lives, but soon, strange things began to happen. The first oddity was a mysterious book that appeared on one of the Sims' shelves, titled The Tome of Shadows. When Tim clicked on it, the Sim would start reading, and the game's music would shift to a slower, more eerie melody. As days passed in game, the Sims began to experience what could only be described as hauntings. Objects would move on their own, lights would flicker, and occasionally, in the corner of the screen, you could see fleeting glimpses of something not quite human. Tim thought it was part of the game experience, but I noticed he was less enthusiastic, his laughter replaced by a tense silence. One night I found him still playing, the screen casting an eerie glow on his face, which was set in a grim line. "Look," he said, pointing to the screen. His Sim was now interacting with a spectral figure, a ghost that wasn't part of the original game or the expansion pack's promotional material. This ghost was different. It was more detailed, almost too lifelike for the game's graphics. It whispered something to the Sim, but no text or sound came through. Tim tried to guide his Sim away, but the ghost followed, its presence growing more aggressive each time it appeared. The game would crash when he tried to delete the ghost, and when he restarted, the ghost was back, this time in their bedroom, hovering over the bed. The creepiest moment came when Tim noticed the ghost was mimicking his actions outside of the game. He'd move his mouse, and the ghost would look in the same direction. He'd pause the game, and the ghost would stand still, just staring. The eeriness peaked when he switched off the computer, only to hear a soft, whispering laugh from the basement shadows. That night, we couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house seemed like a footstep, every shadow a lurking figure. The next day, we decided to uninstall the expansion pack, but even after it was gone, the atmosphere in the basement felt different, colder, somehow more oppressive. Months later, when we moved the PC upstairs, we found something under where it had sat, a small, old book with no title. Inside, the pages were filled with indecipherable symbols and sketches that looked strikingly similar to the ghost from the game. We burned it, but the memory of that expansion pack, and the ghost that seemed to transcend the screen, lingers like a cold spot in a dark room. Whenever Tim plays video games now, he always does so with all the lights on, the door wide open, and never alone. I used to be big into the Sims games, and almost every day after school I'd hunt online for new mods or look for news about the games. My favorite was always The Sims 3, especially after I discovered the modding community. There was this one mod, The Echo of the Past, which promised to add depth to the gameplay with mysterious artifacts and haunted objects. I downloaded it without much thought, eager to see what new elements it would introduce. At first, everything was thrilling. My Sims would find strange relics in their backyards, and their houses would occasionally be visited by spectral figures that added an eerie but exciting twist to the game. But then, things took a turn. The mod seemed to have a life of its own, beyond what was advertised. One afternoon, I noticed my main Sim, Emily, acting strangely. She'd stop whatever she was doing, stare blankly at the wall, and then her mood would plummet into terror. This wasn't a glitch, it was consistent, and it started to happen more frequently. When I checked her thoughts or interactions, they were filled with phrases like, "something watching," or "the walls whisper." The mod's artifacts, once mere decorative items, began to change. A mirror that was supposed to show a glimpse of the future now occasionally reflected something behind Emily. It was a shadowy figure that wasn't in the room. Paintings would alter overnight, showing scenes of darkness and despair where there were once happy landscapes. As days in the game passed, the eerie phenomena escalated. My Sims would wake up from sleep with their mood bars completely drained, as if they'd been through nightmares beyond the game's capacity to depict. One night, while playing, I heard a soft, static-like whisper coming from my speakers. It wasn't from the game's usual sound effects, it was a voice, low and murmuring, reciting names, including mine. At this point I tried to uninstall the mod, but it seemed stuck in the game's files. Every time I delete it, it would reappear in the mod list the next time I booted up the game. And each session, the disturbances grew more personal. My Sim's house began to look like mine, the layout eerily similar, down to the placement of furniture and decor. The final straw was when I found a secret room in the game that mirrored my own basement, where I played. Inside this digital version, there was a figure that looked just like me, playing on a computer. As I watched, this in-game version of myself looked up, directly at where I was sitting, and smiled. I shut off the computer in horror, but the chill didn't leave me. For weeks, I avoided the game, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I walked into my basement, I'd feel an eerie presence, the air heavy with the echo of whispers. I eventually got rid of the PC, but to this day I sometimes hear that static whisper when I'm alone. It's a reminder of the echo of the past that seemed to have crossed from the digital into the real.